Windows XP. Possibly one of the most used operating systems in the world. Sure, it wasn't as good as 2000 speed-wise, nor did it have features that 9X had, such as compatibility with older programs despite 9X's bugginess, but everybody used it because it came with literally every machine. It came with computers running, It came with computers from Dell, HP, IBM, nearly every machine from basically 2001 to at least 2006 to 2007 came with XP. Some afterwards, such as underpowered netbooks. However, the times have changed. XP is outdated, it has tons of bugs, and people's reluctance to, say, get a newer version of Windows such as Vista 7 or 8 has pretty much kept many people on an insecure, dated OS with many flaws, which isn't optimized for newer hardware, doesn't have many new features the newer versions of Windows have, such as searching from the start menu. And to add it all up, here's another main flaw with it. Did I mention that it had so many security holes? Keep in mind XP was designed back in 2001, 2002. Even before XP got dumped, it was getting exploited heavily with outdated versions of Internet Explorer, such as Internet Explorer 6. At one point, that was a hotbed of target. You could literally click a website and boom, your PC would get infected. And stuff like that was common with XP. Of course, they've done many security updates, but now XP is basically gone. Today, Microsoft decided they're going to stop supporting XP, and today's the final day for XP support because it's an old operating system back from a time when a smartphone probably meant a phone grafted onto a Palm Pilot, and not something like, say, an iPhone. It's also from a time when the Xbox meant that big black box with the shape like an X, and when the PS2 is basically the only PlayStation people bought, along with the PS1. Now, despite Microsoft's efforts to get people to move over, many people still won't move off XP, despite the fact that more and more programs are dropping support for it, and despite the fact that it's insecure, and despite the fact that even Microsoft's been trying to make Windows 8.1 more friendly for those people who want a start menu with the new Update 1. Despite these efforts, though, by Microsoft and the other companies to get people off XP by either giving them discounts or that stuff, there's another force trying to get people off XP. The Linux crowd. They've been coming out of the woodwork in the comment box to talk about how Microsoft's ruined and how Linux insert distro here is the best ever. I decided to test that theory, however, to see if Linux is actually a usable replacement with several XP-era computers. The computer for this, an old IBM ThinkCentre from the Pentium 4 hyper-threading era. It's one of the later ones as it has an Intel 900 chipset, but it only uses DDR1 memory, but it at least has PCI Express and a BTX motherboard. How well will this machine run Linux? I'm going to throw a 40 gig hard drive and try Mint on it, because apparently Mint is the most popular Linux distro from what I could find. As you can see, the system clearly works. Other than that bizarre beeping, which might have been from sitting around too long, it boots up, posts fine, and of course, it also let me see the specs of it, which were a Pentium 4 hyper-threading processor, which is only a single-core processor but with a fake dual-core functionality, along with some other stuff such as 2 gigs of RAM. And, well, like I said, it only has an Intel 900 GPU pretty much. So, how good is this? Well, it can run Windows 7 pretty much usable. However, it does have a few flaws. For example, one flaw is the fact that the GPU does not support Aero in 7. However, it works in 7, unlike, say, the older Intel Extreme graphics line. So, let's try running Linux on it, since it should work fine after all, right? For the Linux Mint, I tried the default Cinnamon-based distro, which runs on Ubuntu. However, I had a major problem. It did not want to boot. I tried using a USB drive, I tried using the one built into the computer, and it didn't work. Even though I got it to load, even though I put it in the startup sequence and then went into F12 to boot it, I got some real bizarre error message, which had to do with something. I don't know what it was, because Linux keeps throwing up bizarre messages. Apparently, it's a bug in mainline Ubuntu that hasn't been fixed for years, and they just said is a problem with certain hardware. This is a common running trend with Linux, as there are many times where the computer will have certain hardware, but they won't fix it because it's not the most mainstream thing out there. As for this, when I tried the Debian one, it was actually fairly well off when it came to hardware, because this is actually a box standard PC with, well, basically normal x86 stuff, normal 2005 hardware pretty much, but as you can clearly see, I got this error message. This did not happen when I tried the Debian one. Installation is the standard fare with Linux. Language, keyboard layout, that stuff. However, I did run into a snag when trying to format it, as it did not give me a format whole drive option. Maybe it's because of Linux's noob-friendly focus, but I don't know why it did that. It doesn't help this can be daunting to somebody who's never ever done this kind of stuff in Linux before. Especially if they've only used something like, let's just say, Windows or that stuff. Especially when it comes to asking people questions such as, please select the root partition. Many people aren't going to know this. While I installed it, I pretty much saw the usual messages you see when you're installing an OS, talking about how Linux Mint is the fourth most widely used desktop OS, despite the fact that Linux only has a 1% market share still. It also gloats about how it's compatible with stuff such as basically how apps can be installed with the click of a mouse, how it's compatible with many formats, mostly with programs that are basically just clones of those that come with Windows, and many of them, such as LibreOffice, even are available on Windows. And of course, it also talks about how it's the best thing ever, how it's the good alternative to those evil mainstream operating systems, how you'll never need an antivirus or anti-spyware, despite the fact that Linux does have viruses, in fact, and the only reason it's, quote, secure is through security through obscurity. And let's be honest, nobody's going to want to hack a Linux desktop because nobody uses it. Of course, if Linux got popular, you'd see viruses for it and that stuff. Just look at what happened with OS X. It also talks about how it never tells you about how updates are available, even though that can be unsafe, because as we've all learned, especially if your computer is prone to getting, let's just say, monitored by those people, you'd want to upgrade and get updates fast. So, once it was installed, the boot up times weren't too bad for a Pentium 4. Of course, whether it can boot up fast and whether it can do anything are two different things. I mean, while the boot times were slightly faster than that of Windows 7 on the same machine, or similar machines with less RAM, let's be honest here. Computer boot times don't have anything to do with how much they can actually do. Because if that were the case, everybody would still be using System 6 or DOS, because those boot up real fast too. Of course, let's be honest here. I'm actually going to try using this. I'm going to try doing several things, including installing Skype, browsing the internet, and of course, trying to edit a video in it, because those are many things people did in XP. I ran into a snag when I tried to search the web. It came with rebranded Bing or Yahoo, and it also came with DuckDuckGo, a search engine designed by some people who believe that everybody's going to be watching them, and which got a ton of hype after, all that stuff happened. But however, you can't use your Google or Bing, so if you trust those, you have to go scroll through and click add, because apparently they made it kind of You have to add it, unlike the other ones where it's added by default. So basically you have to do a little bit of that stuff just to get it added by default. The second thing I decided to do was watch YouTube on it. Of course I don't have Skype open or any stuff that will hog up CPU like Steam or that stuff. So I decided to go and Google some random gameplay video of an old Super Nintendo game. And basically it played pretty much fine. However, it does not have the newest version of Flash Player and probably won't get it unless you use Google Chrome because most Linux Flash support is dumped. I also tried watching a video trailer for a game not available on Linux in HD, and it played in HD somewhat with frame rate drops because, well, it's a Pentium 4, but that's to be expected because Pentium 4s aren't really the fastest CPUs, especially considering how the only video chip this thing has is the default Intel GMA 900. I guarantee it would be faster if I put a faster GPU in here, such as a later PCI Express one that supports DirectX 11. It comes with an IM client called Pigeon, which supports AIM, XMPP, Yahoo, MSN, and various other protocols that I really don't know if people even still use, such as ICQ, but it supports those protocols. It'll let you log into AIM and that stuff, and you can see how many people still use AIM, but other than that, unless you're trying to do unless you use Skype or something, you'll have to download another client. Same with Steam, especially considering those two IM clients are used a lot. And AIM did log in for me, but let's go back to Steam and that stuff. I was able to use the integrated package manager, Synaptic, as it's a Linux distro, and instead of using, say, something like the flashy but bloated center that Ubuntu uses, it uses the old style package manager. While this is faster and better for somebody who has more Linux experience like me, it's not as good for, say, newbies. And I had to search for Steam on here. While I did find the Steam installer, I did not find the Skype installer, and I had to manually download that off the Skype website. As for Steam, it's basically the same as other stuff. Of course, it has to install 400 respiratories or something like that because, 400, what are they called, dependencies? Yeah, it had to install a bunch of those because apparently Mint doesn't come with dependencies and that stuff for that stuff. But I was able to install it and get that to work. And then, as usual, that's to update just like PC Steam does, but I think you get the idea of what I'm getting at. Skype, on the other hand, was a different story. Despite saying that it was one click away, it was not on the respiratory, and I had to go to their website, and I had to go to the Skype website to download it. I had to download Skype from the official website, and then it took a while because of all the dependencies that had to be downloaded, because you see, Skype required I think 80 or 90 dependencies for a single program, mostly because they didn't come with Mint, so I had to download those. And it crashed while I was installing them too. It froze up while I was installing, however Steam somehow was working fine. It also only let me install one at a time too, just like Windows Installer. However, something did happen and I thought I might as well bring it up about Skype and stuff. About Skype, it does require audio, but the computer's internal speaker did not work. This isn't too surprising because it requires a driver on 7, but still. Once I got Skype installed, there was something else I noticed. Skype for Linux is woefully outdated. Sure, it has some features desktop Skype has recently, such as attempting to merge some parts of the current user interface into the old version, along with the fact that pretty much it does also offer the ability to sign into Microsoft account-based Skype IDs, but at the same time, it won't let you do stuff such as, well, it doesn't use the current layout. It uses the old Skype version layout, so it feels like a mishmash of the newest version of Skype and a real old version of Skype. I mean, like, you know, the old version of Mac Skype? That's what it kind of feels like. Off screen, it also crashed on me while I was trying to use it to send messages. And it does make calls, but it does feel a bit outdated, especially considering how it's based on an old version of Skype. I did not have my microphone hooked up. However, I was able to do a quick test call to Skype just to test how well it worked. And it did seem to have some bugs. And yeah, that's my phone ringing. As expected with Linux, weird glitches like this one, where the fake start menu disappeared, were not uncommon. And I had to Control-Delete to log out, especially considering how Linux, from what I have used of it, doesn't have a simple Control-Delete task manager like Windows does, where you can just kill programs that crash. So I had to log out and log back in. And this took a while and was especially awkward to do, especially because I did not know what the magic commands were on Linux. To test gaming, I decided to run a game I knew would run on a GMA 900, Half-Life 1, or one of the Gold Source-based games, which in this case was Team Fortress Classic. So I decided to load the game up, and lo and behold, it takes a while to load for the first time. There are some other bizarre things I noticed in the game, but let me get to the loading first. It took a while to load on Linux, and the hard drive light blinked quite a lot, but then it finally loaded, and so I decided to change my player name and join a game. I just joined a random listen server. I couldn't tell if the frame rate was because of the GPU or because of Linux or the bad optimization, but the frame rate was iffy. I also noticed that the fonts were all different, but many of the fonts went back to normal after I downloaded the core fonts package, which you have to know where it's at and you have to download it. For example, such as the ammo. But yeah, the frame rate wasn't the best. I couldn't tell if it was because of Linux or that though, so I'll let it be for that. Linux's game support is terrible as well, with only Valve supporting it and a few indies. As with me, most of the games I owned on Steam just flat out did not work. It wouldn't even let me install them. Even ones with Linux versions weren't on Steam, such as Doom 3 and Unreal Tournament 2004. But yeah. Another amazing thing about Linux was the fact that when I plugged my SD card reader in, it did not automatically mount the media like it did on Windows. I actually had to reboot to get my SD card to read on Linux. I wonder why it did that, especially considering Windows can. It doesn't help when I'm just trying to copy a few video files off and Linux just doesn't want to see the device, which can make it real annoying. Especially for someone wanting to replace XP and say wanting something that can do home media and that stuff, they're not going to like this feature, as it's just going to make it worse for them. I mean, even some other Linuxes will tell you when you plug that kind of stuff in. I tried Kdenlive, which I think it was called, which was a video editor in the respiratory. It decided to make itself annoying when I was trying to just edit a title. I couldn't drag the title length like I could in, say, Premiere, I think, and Windows Movie Maker. I had to go into the item and change how long it appeared for. But then I encountered a far worse usability flaw when trying to edit a video. Not only was there input lag when I tried to play it, but then once I tried to increase the length of it or actually play the preview, the video editor decided to tell me to screw off by freezing up. Look at this. And after clicking so long, it does just like what 7 does and will want to quit on its own by asking you if you want to quit the non-responsive program. It did this several times for me, and all in all, it's pretty unusable. However, the main thing that will kill off Linux for many people is the fact that it cannot run your Windows programs, even with Wine. The only really way to do it is to use a virtual machine, because if I tried running Windows Word 2000 and it didn't even work. I mean, every Office program I tried just closed the second it loaded for some bizarre reason. I really don't know why it did that, but In the end, I just wouldn't trust Linux to run your older programs with Wine. I mean, I still can't do it. Wine is still a joke. It doesn't help that LibreOffice has issues with fonts, especially on Linux, because Linux doesn't come with the fonts. So what do I think of Linux Mint? So is Linux meant for everyone? Definitely not, and let me explain why. With that computer, I was only using the basic variables. I wasn't using any other devices. Linux is known for having device compatibility issues. In fact, when you install it, it even gives you a list of compatible hardware. And that's because many devices that work on Windows don't work on Linux. And I actually tried installing Linux on another computer, which I didn't record too much of because it didn't even work that well, and because there was nothing interesting worth filming. But I installed Linux on an old IBM terminal, like one of those IBM cash register terminals. I installed Linux on it, and it ran slowly. While XP ran fine, Linux ran slowly, had bizarre issues, and it didn't really work that well. So all in all, let's be honest here. Linux is only for if your computer could run 7 in that stuff. And you know what? This IBM computer I ran it on sure can run 7. And in fact, I've run 7 on it before. It supports 64-bit, and I was even running the 64-bit version of Linux on it. But if you're stuck with an XP computer that's like really bad and can't run 7, as in can't run it and not just saying, oh, it's got a ton of junkware on it can't run 7, then Linux isn't for you. It's not going to fix your computer or magically make it faster, because let's be honest, Linux just isn't that great when it comes to that. It also can't run your older programs, and it also has bizarre issues as well. I wouldn't recommend Linux unless you're desperate to get off a pirated copy of XP. Vista's cheap. 7 is only $100. 8 somewhat cheaper than 7. You can get one of those if your computer can actually run it. Put it on there. If your computer is junk, you can buy a new computer. You might as well buy a new computer, because I didn't mention this, but Cinnamon's different enough from Windows to have somewhat of a learning curve. So if you're going to want to learn that kind of stuff, you might as well just get a new version of Windows, because it's going to have far more programs than Linux ever will. So all in all, Linux just isn't that good of a replacement for Windows XP. And it's just kind of bleh from what I've used of it. And my final thoughts on it are, I definitely wouldn't replace it I definitely wouldn't get it if I had to replace an XP machine. I'd just get 7 or 8 or Vista, because they work better. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.